Okay, today we're going to look at lesson 9 and 10 actually combined, but we're going to be working with multiplying more numbers, more rational numbers, and today is going to be a little bit different because we're going to have two negative numbers being multiplied, and we're going to look at what happens with that. If you remember yesterday, we kind of left off with lesson 8, where we were multiplying one negative number times a positive number, and when we did that, we got a negative product. So now we're going to see today what happens when we have two negative factors, two negative numbers being multiplied. Now, we continue the idea from yesterday, which was we had a road that traveled east and west. And just like the number line, if the car was traveling east, it had a velocity that was positive. If the car was traveling west, it had a velocity that was negative. And then here in the center, at 0, remember there was a camera. And that camera was recording as the car went by. So let's look at the table here. Now we've got 5 different cars. We have 5 different velocities. Some are positive and some are negative. So keep in mind, if it's a positive velocity, the car is traveling east. If it's a negative velocity, the car is traveling to the west. So we'll just go ahead and label those just to keep that in mind. Now, based off of yesterday's example, our times were always a positive amount. Okay, here, what it's going to tell us is that a negative time is when the car has not yet reached the camera here in the center. So let's take a look at this first example, car C, and try to understand that a little bit better. So car C has a velocity of positive 25 meters per second, which means the car is traveling to the east. It's positive. Now, time after passing the camera is plus 10. So here at the camera is 0 seconds. 1, 2, 3, we count up to 10 seconds later, and that's going to be our position, our ending position. Every one of those seconds that it traveled, it went 25 meters because that was the velocity of the car. So here, we get our ending position of 250 because we multiplied the velocity times the time to get that ending position. Now, let's look at car D. This car has a negative velocity, which all that means is the car is traveling west. Now, the negative velocity happens for 30 seconds. 30 seconds past the time that it passed the camera. If we multiply those two, because that's what we did to solve this, we would take negative 20 times times the time, 30, and get negative 600. And that was very similar to what we did yesterday in the examples, where we had a negative and a positive factor, and it gave us a negative product. Now we'll continue that idea, but the negative is now going to switch to the time. And this is where it's a little trickier to understand. So if the car is traveling with a positive velocity, it's traveling east, it is a time of negative 40 seconds. Now, negative time is a very weird concept to try to understand, but really what we're looking at is we're looking at the time after passing the camera is what's being recorded here. If we have a negative time, what we're talking about is a time before this car reaches the camera spot where it's had its picture taken. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to follow the same pattern. We're going to multiply positive 32 times negative 40 to equal negative, I'm running out of space here, 1,280. Negative 1,280 is the ending position. Okay, and that makes sense because multiplying a positive and negative gives us a negative product. Now the negative 40 seconds means it is 40 seconds away from reaching the camera's position here. It's 40 seconds before reaching the camera, and then it would start to become a positive time again. That's going to be important as we look at this next one. Here we're multiplying two negative numbers. So we have a velocity that's negative 35 meters per second. That means the car is traveling in the red line here. It's traveling to the west in the negative direction. Then the time is also negative 20. So that means that we are 20 seconds before reaching the camera. If we track back the path of this car and go 20 seconds before the car reaches the camera, we're over in this side of the road. This side of the road is on the positive end of the road. So we should get, if we are 20 seconds before the camera going this direction, we should be in a positive ending position, someplace over here. Now that's important because that is our rule for multiplication. If we multiply two negative factors, what we get is a positive product, and our position would be positive 700. So we can try that again here. If the car is traveling at a velocity of negative 15, it's going to the west, to the negative side, but we're 8 seconds before passing the camera. If we go 8 seconds before passing the camera, we're over here again on the positive end of the road, the positive side of 0. And when we write that out, negative 15 times negative 8, and really it's probably good practice to put this in parentheses, what we get is positive 120 as an ending position. Okay? So let's look at these questions now that we've filled in the table. That was the tricky part. The question says, for question 3 here, after we complete the table, if a car is traveling east, when it passes the camera, will its position be positive or negative 60 seconds before it passes the camera? So, looking at the blue line here, the car is traveling to the east, but we're going before reaching the camera. 60 seconds before reaching the camera, we're actually going to be on the negative end of this road. So we would mark negative, positive or negative, negative. Next, if we multiply a negative and a positive number, will the result be positive or negative? This is what we discussed yesterday. Well, if we multiply a negative number and a positive number, then the result will be negative. And if a car is traveling west when it passes the camera, will its position be positive or negative 60 seconds before it passes the camera? So it's traveling west along this red line here, but we're looking at 60 seconds before it reaches the camera. We're over here on the positive side of the road, so we would mark positive. And if we multiply, here's the very important part today, if we multiply two negative numbers, the result will be, just as these two cars showed us here, car F and car G, multiplying two negative numbers gives us a positive result. All right, let's look at another example. It says around noon, a car was traveling negative 32 meters per second down a highway. At exactly noon, when the time was 0, the position of the car was 0 meters. Complete the table. So, let's draw that. We've got our road. And again, we've got our negative and our positive direction. 0 here is what it told us was noon. And that's where the car is going to be. So, if that car is traveling at negative 32 meters per second, then what we need to do is we need to do some calculations with that. Now, I think it might be easier to fill in the positive times here, but let's remember it says the car is traveling negative 32 meters, so the car is traveling this direction. All right? And if we go 2 seconds, positive 2 seconds, that's 2 seconds after passing this 0 position here. So it's gone negative 32 meters in 1 second, and another negative 32 meters in 2 seconds. So that would give us a total of negative 64 meters would be the position, because we're taking 2 times negative 32. Now we're going to do 5 times negative 32 and fill that in. 8 times negative 32 would be next. And then 11 times negative 32 would be the last. And this is getting more negative because the car is traveling in this direction. As we get further past this noon position, the car is getting further away from 0. It's getting further negative. So now, if we go to negative times, we're talking about times before the car reaches this center, before it reaches noon. We're talking about first 1 second before reaching noon. It's going to be over here on the positive end of our number line. 1 second before reaching that, it's going to be 32 meters from this center point here. So we did that by taking negative 1 times the velocity, negative 32. And remember, multiplying two negative factors will give us a positive product. Now let's look at the same. Now we're going to do it for negative 4 seconds. 4 seconds before the car reaches this noon position, where was the car at? Well, negative 4 times negative 32 is 128. Then we do negative 7 times negative 32. And negative 10 times negative 32. Now that the chart's completed, it wants us to fill in the table. Now remember, almost always time is going to be our x value, and position is going to be our y value. And if you look at the numbers here, you can see that they fit more with what we need, because our numbers for position are much larger than our times. And notice the smaller numbers are here on the x-axis. So this is our time. This is our position on the y-axis. And our graph here is going in the positive and the negative direction on both axes. So let's put in a couple of points that I want you to try a few, and we will go from there. Now the car is traveling at a constant speed, so that should tell you, if we go way back, that this is a proportional relationship. It should be a straight line passing through the origin. So let's find those points. Negative 10, 320 is where I'm going to start. Negative 10 on the x-axis, so I go to negative 10 up to 320. And we need to look at the intervals, which are going up by 25s for each of those lines, each of those grid marks. So negative 10 to 320 would be right there, just barely on the grid. Negative 7 and 224 would be right about there. And we're just going to have to be approximate because this isn't a very precise graph. Negative 4, 128. Now, remember, proportional relationships, straight line through the origin of the graph. That should collect with all these points here. All right? Now, it says, what is the position of the car at negative 3 seconds? Negative 3 seconds, we're still in the positive position. But please don't use this graph to try to guess. We can calculate this. We know that the car is traveling negative 32 meters every second. We're at negative 3 seconds. So what we need to do is multiply our velocity by our time. Remember, that's a negative time. And what we'd get is 96 meters, which fits with what we said. We said at negative 3 seconds, it should be a positive time. 96 would be just below 100 here. So yeah, we are very close to that. And what's the position of the car at 6.5 seconds? Well, we just set it up by multiplying the velocity times now the positive time, that's going to put us down here into the negative position. At 6.5 seconds, we're going to be down here around negative 225, it looks like. So if we actually multiply that, we get negative 208 meters. All right, we are moving along. We've got a couple more quick examples to look at, and this would be the first one. Decide if each equation is true or false. So keep in mind, well, of course we have to know whether they multiplied correctly. 7 times 8 is 56, and you can see that these 4 examples all use similar numbers, all get similar products. We just are going to have to check the rules for multiplying. So multiplying 2 positive numbers will give us a positive product. That one is true. If we multiply 1 negative by a positive, then we should have a negative 56. That'd be false. But now we learned if we multiply 2 negatives, we should have a positive here. So this one's also false. But they did that correctly for number 4 with the positive here. Go ahead and try 5, 6, 7, and 8, please. All right, what you hopefully found was that, yes, this one's true. Multiplying 2 positives will give us 42. Multiplying a negative and a negative in number 6 should give us a positive. That would be false. Again, multiplying 2 negatives gives us a positive. That's true. And then multiplying a negative times a positive, that's wrong, because this should be negative 42. All right. Now let's look at the last example. Noah was doing some homework and answered the following questions. Do you agree with his answers? If you disagree, explain your reasoning. Again, let's just check his work. Most likely the multiplication was done correctly, and we're just checking our multiplying rational numbers rules. If we multiply a positive and a negative, different signs, we should have a negative product. So yes, I agree with that. Let's see, we'll put agree. And for the next one, multiplying 2 negatives should be a positive, so I disagree with that. And then finally, multiplying a positive and a negative should give us a negative, so I disagree with that one as well. All right, well, now you should be familiar with what happens when we multiply just one negative factor to a positive factor, and what happens when we multiply 2 negative factors. So when we multiply just one, we get a negative product. When we multiply, let me write that out. When we multiply just one negative factor times a positive, we get negative. But if we multiply 2 negatives, what we get is a positive. Very important to learn. This is basically the rule for multiplying rational numbers. So learn it, get familiar with it. We're going to continue to use this as we do multiplication and division. And go ahead and do your practice on Canvas. Everybody have a great day.